Hi, it's Mike, and we're back with another Game Creator 2 tip. This time it's on how to use signals and see how you can use signals in Game Creator 2 to create this kind of interactions where we come up to this fence, we trigger the alarm, and it causes the guard and the UI to be updated at the same time. All done with signals. So stay tuned and we'll see how to set this scene up. All right, so we're in this scene, and right now all I have is in the scene is the player object. There's an enemy, and I've got a fence, and there's a box there. But so there's no interactivity right now, and I'm on the UI. I've got this alarm off. I have this alarm off element in the UI, but it's just static text. And so if we play this, nothing will happen. Nothing happens. So today we want to talk about signals. It's an event system that you can create your own custom events. So you can have an event-based system in Game Creator 2. So it's sort of like the observer pattern. So you've got an observer waiting or monitoring for events, and then when those events are received, then it can do an action accordingly. And you can have multiple observers looking at the same event too. So we're going to look at that as well. What we want to do is when the player triggers an alarm that's nearer to this fence, let's say this is some facility and we've got the guard inside, we want the guard to come running and to investigate. So we're gonna set up this an alarm trigger over here to start with. So let's just create that. All I'm going to do is create a cube, and the cube is going to be right here. About the same size as the fence. And we're just going to turn off the mesh renderer, and we're going to look at the box collider and make it a trigger. So that's all we're going to do with that, and then make sure that this is right up against the fence. So when the player enters this, we want that to trigger the alarm. So how do we do that? So what we want to do is make sure the player is tagged as player. And then if we go to this cube, we'll call it the alarm. The alarm. And what we want to do is add a trigger, and the event will be on trigger enter tag. Want the on trigger enter tag with the tag of player, so that when the player enters this trigger, so on trigger enter tag, we want the instruction, and it's found in the visual scripting, and it's called emit signal. So we're just going to name it. So I'm just going to call it alarm. You can name it whatever you want. It just has to be the same name as the whatever is receiving that signal. So we're just going to emit the signal, and we want the guard to be listening for that signal. So the enemy needs to have, I'm going to create an empty component on the enemy. And we'll just name this AI. We could put his AI routines in there. And we're going to put a trigger, and it's in the logic on receive signal, and then alarm, the same signal. So add instruction, and we want him to move to a certain location when he gets the signal. So So that would be in characters, navigation, move to. And we can move this character to a marker. So we want to create a marker for him to go to. So on the alarm thing, I'm going to create an empty child called marker. And we're going to put a marker in there, a marker object. So now we have this marker object. We can move it here. He'll face the direction that the marker is in. So it's going to face that way. So he'll come right over here. So that's the marker we want. And then AI, we want to make it the marker right there. Okay. So when the player triggers that, he'll get the event and come over to the marker. So let's see if that works. So we have the player, and then the guard comes over because he triggered the alarm. So that's how that signal works. And we can also have other objects that are listening for the same signal. So let me update the UI by having a UI manager object. And so this object, all it does is it's responsible for updating the UI. So what we'll do is have it listen for the same signal. So on receive signal, alarm, and when it receives that, it's going to set the text in the UI to, and we just tell it what the UI text is. And we will update it to alarm triggered. So now we go back into play mode. And now when we trigger the alarm, it'll go from off to triggered. And that's how we have multiple listeners to the same event. So you can have a UI manager that sits there listening for different events where it needs to know what to update or to update the UI. So you can, with this method, you can decouple all of your systems, and you can have like a different manager for each type of thing, like a UI manager. Your enemy logic can be self-contained in the enemy, and it can listen for certain events. And you could have a game manager that's just listening for events. This is the way you would do turn-based logic, where you can have a game manager that's listening for events, and then when it receives an event, it can tell the next player or enable the next player's turn, and then when the player's turn is over, it can notify the game manager that the turn is over, and then it will go to the next turn. So will be the easiest way to implement a turn-based game is by using signals fairly easily too. I'll show you how to implement a simple turn-based system using action points and a turn manager. So here's how I've set this up. I have added this to the UI to keep track of whose turn it is. So the player starts, and then in the player logic, I have added the local name variable action points and give it 20. And every time the player takes a step, the action points get decremented. So when the action points change, we're listening for the on local variable change of action points. If the action points is greater than 0, then the player is controllable. If the action points equal 0, then it's no longer controllable. And it'll signal that the player's turn is ending, player end turn. And then we're also listening for a receive signal for player turn, which the player will receive, and then it'll set its action points back to 20. and then the player can move again. So in the turn manager, what I have here is it's listening for player end turn, and then when it gets that, it'll signal the enemy turn. And if it receives an enemy end turn, it'll signal the player turn. And that's all it has to do. So it will alternate between the enemy and the player. So in the enemy logic, it's listening for enemy turn. So once it knows its turn, then I would just put in wait 3 seconds for now, but you could put any enemy logic. This is where the enemy makes his move. And then it signals enemy end turn. So that would go back to the turn manager, and then the turn manager would signal the player to go back and do his turn. So on player turn, it'll reset the action points for the next turn. And I also have the UI manager listening for the signals of player turn and enemy turn, and then just set the UI text accordingly as to whose turn it is. So this makes for a fairly easy basic turn-based system that you can implement fairly quickly with signals. So right now I've got up to 20 steps I can take, and then the enemy will wait 3 seconds. So I can't move right now. And then the player's turn now. Now it's the enemy's turn. Now it's the player's turn. So this is sort of how you could possibly do like an XCOM, like squad-based, turn-based strategy game you can use signals to control the turns. And you could use the same method to do board games or any turn-based games actually. So that's it for today on Signals. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.